The Emperor Antoninus Pius, who ruled from AD 138 to 161, is an intriguing figure, not because of what we know, but because of what we don't know. Sources do not speak of any wars or scandals or dramatic execution, but they do speak of loyalty, family, and the careful, almost decentralized management of the Pax Romana. However, his reign did produce a great number of coins. And what I'd like to do in this episode is show you how we can understand a reign through the evidence of coinage. We'll gain a sense of how Antoninus Pius interacted with the Senate, the extent to which he was loyal to the plans of Hadrian, the emperor that preceded him, and his devotion to family, as well as his big family, that is, the people of Rome. Antoninus Pius is remembered as one of the greatest emperors in Roman history, despite the fact that we know so little about him. Is this reputation merited? Let's talk about it on this episode of the Pax Romana podcast. Episode 47, The Reign of Antoninus Pius. Way back on episode 40, and it seems like ages ago, we left off with the strange demise of the Emperor Hadrian, who died in the year 138 AD. Succeeding Hadrian was the man who would come to be known as Antoninus Pius. This is what Hadrian said about him. Quote, "I have found one who is noble, mild, tractable, prudent, neither young enough to do anything reckless, nor old enough to neglect aught. One brought up according to the laws, who has held possession of authority according to his country's traditions, so that he is not ignorant of any matters pertaining to his office, but can handle them all effectively." And those comments are recorded in Cassius Dio's Roman history. And we don't know if Cassius Dio was making those comments up, but at least the essence of the speech seems to be based on fact. Now, we don't know a lot about Antoninus Pius, I should say that at the get-go. And in fact, most of the arguments about what Antoninus Pius must have been like are from silence. In other words, we don't have evidence of bad behavior. We don't have evidence of any major wars or civil unrest. We don't see anything in the sources about scandals or corruption. There were no prominent executions of senators. Now, that's not because none of these things existed. It's because the record of Antoninus Pius's reign is just so thin. And I don't want to repeat those sorts of arguments. Historians tend to avoid arguments from silence, or at least we usually try to. And instead, I'd like to focus on what we can actually know about Antoninus Pius. He was old when he took office. In his early 50s, he was experienced, just like Hadrian says. He had served as consul in the year AD 120, and then he served as governor in northern Italy. Finally, near the end of Hadrian's life, he was made governor of the province of Asia, that is, Western Asia Minor. We don't really know how well Antoninus Pius distinguished himself in these offices. We just know that he held them. We also know very little about his personal life. He was a married man, married to a woman who we now call Faustina the Elder, and he married her at about the normal age that most Roman men got married, that is, in his late 20s or early 30s. She would have, of course, been much younger than that. That was also typical. We don't know much about Faustina's character either, only that some sources claim that she was a loyal and faithful wife, while others hint at affairs. And again, these sources are so questionable that we just can't really know. The chief among these sources, by the way, is something called the Augustan History, which provides the only biography of Antoninus Pius. It's written several hundred years later. It's riddled with known exaggerations and just outright lies, and so historians tend to mistrust quite a bit about what it says about Antoninus Pius. I will say that there are some parts of the Augustan history that do seem reliable. They mostly have to do with other emperors and not Antoninus Pius. Even the biography in the Augustan history doesn't really say much about her other than that she bore him 2 sons and 2 daughters, and that when she died unexpectedly in AD 141, which would have been just a few years into his reign, he was utterly heartbroken over her death. And she was honored quite excessively. She already had the title Augusta, Empress, but then the Senate voted to award her deification. She was given games, even a temple, priestesses, statues of silver and gold. Antoninus Pius had statues of her erected in the various amphitheaters and many other public places. And one of the more unique ways of remembering his wife was that Antoninus Pius founded an order for impoverished girls, perhaps orphan girls, and he named this order after her. You probably don't offer these sorts of honors to a woman who had betrayed you. So I tend to think that she was probably a loyal and dutiful wife. Now, had she lived longer, who knows what she would have done, but I think it's safe to say that she was probably a faithful wife. Antoninus Pius really did care about her, and that these various memorials represent genuine affection. And Antoninus Pius, the name Pius, is in reference to fulfilling duties. It's where we get the term piety. That is, this was a man who remembered this woman by never remarrying. Of course, he had mistresses throughout his life, which would have been excused under Roman culture. It's just the way that it was. But the fact that he never remarried was seen by many contemporaries as a sign of respect to his late wife, Faustina. Now, the other person, by the way, that Antoninus Pius was being loyal to in not remarrying was Hadrian. As you'll recall, perhaps from episode 40, Hadrian put in place a kind of micromanaged succession plan where Antoninus Pius would be Hadrian's son, and then Antoninus Pius would then in turn adopt 2 men, Hadrian's adoptive grandsons. These are the men that would come to be known as Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Verus. And if Antoninus Pius were to marry an eligible elite woman and have children with her, this would, of course, put those sons into a position of conflict with those that had been appointed by Hadrian. So Antoninus Pius refusing to marry was also a sign of faithfulness to Hadrian. So you can see that based on what we know about Antoninus Pius, which isn't much, but all speaks well of him, plus the fact that we don't have any real evidence of bad behavior, has allowed most historians to say, with at least a little bit of confidence, that Antoninus Pius must have been a pretty good emperor. I mean, another piece of evidence we have is that the orator Aelius Aristides wrote an oration to Rome during the reign of Antoninus Pius, and this oration just praises the city of Rome as a beacon of civilization and peace and economic prosperity. And of course, it's over the top. It's a speech that exaggerates quite a lot. At the same time, it would be hard to deliver such a speech and have things at least not be somewhat well in the Roman Empire. So this too is taken as a sign that Antoninus Pius's reign must have been a pretty good one. Finally, then, there's the longevity of the reign. Antoninus Pius took over in July of AD 138 in his early 50s, and he survived through the beginning of March AD 161, dying in his mid-70s. A reign of just shy of 23 years, one of the longest reigns in the Pax Romana up to this point. And again, it's superficial, but this too is evidence that he must have enjoyed support among elites, provincial governors, and perhaps the broader population. We have some evidence from inscriptions, in some cases whole buildings, which suggests that Antoninus Pius was a builder. Probably the most famous construction project with Antoninus Pius's name on it is the Antonine Wall, which is to the north of Hadrian's Wall up in southern Scotland. Antoninus Pius didn't go there personally. In fact, I don't think he ever left Italy, if I'm remembering correctly, during his reign. But his subordinates built a wall in his name. It wasn't nearly as majestic as Hadrian's Wall, nor was it as long. Hadrian's Wall was over 70 miles. The Antonine Wall was just shy of 40. And the Antonine Wall was largely a mound of earth over the top, probably with some wooden structures there to help with the fortifications. And of course, it didn't protect much. Southern Scotland was not exactly a highly urbanized area, nor was it highly populated really at all. It was mostly area for grazing. And so the wall didn't really protect much, and it ended up being more of a liability, if anything, and was abandoned within a few decades. Antoninus Pius was a delegator. He tended to listen to the advice of senators and his provincial governors and give them quite a bit of leeway to do what they thought best. And maybe this is a reason why there were not too many problems during his reign, or at least didn't appear to be, because, at least all things considered, Antoninus Pius took a more decentralized approach as emperor, allowing people to solve problems on a more local level, figure out their own solutions. This, of course, allows those solutions to be more dynamic and responsive and realistic. But there's at least one way we can get a sense of what the central government thought, or at least wanted to project during the reign of Antoninus Pius, and that is through the coinage. Every time I teach on Antoninus Pius, and indeed I will do so in this podcast episode, I go back to an article that I think is one of the best written on the coinage of Antoninus Pius. It's by a scholar at Warwick University. Her name is Claire Rowan, one of the great scholars of Roman coins currently working. And what Claire was able to do was to catalog, broadly speaking, the types of coins that were produced during the reign of Antoninus Pius and what their general message was, in order to get a sense of the values and virtues and messages that were important to the regime. I won't go through the entire article. Obviously, we don't have time. You can read it. Claire's made it publicly available on her academia.edu page. You can just search for Imaging the Golden Age, and you can look for her name, Claire, C-L-A-R-E, Rowan, R-O-W-A-N. Then you can read it. It's actually a quite readable article. The minters of Antoninus Pius's coins, and maybe they were acting independently, or maybe they were acting at least under the explicit or implicit orders of the regime, the gold coins of Antoninus Pius, the most high-value coins that would have been seen mostly by elites and perhaps by some in the military, tend to show virtues of fidelity towards the family. Faustina herself appears quite prominently on these coins. So too does Marcus Aurelius, the young man who Hadrian had designated as his adoptive grandson. Also, themes of piety, of loyalty, are strong on these coins. Piety and images of the imperial family alone make up about half of the gold coins that were produced under Antoninus Pius. Now, the silver coinage, on the other hand, which was based on the silver denarius, really the bedrock coin of the Roman monetary system, the silver coinage tended to focus on economic policies, in particular, his provision of grain to the people of Rome through a system called the annona. Annona coins represent about 22% of silver coins produced. This is the most represented category of coins, followed by fortuna, good fortune, good luck, prosperity. And fortuna goes hand in hand with a healthy grain supply, obviously. So those two coin types are related. Antoninus Pius is wanting to let people know that he provides grain to them and that they have never been happier than they are under his reign. By the middle of the 2nd century AD, much of the wheat that fed Rome's more than 1 million inhabitants came from 3 places, principally from Egypt, but also from Sicily and North Africa. The annona was, in my view at least, a largely state-directed enterprise. Scholars do quibble about how much the state was involved, but I happen to think that the state was highly involved. The Roman state accumulated a majority of the agricultural land, certainly in Egypt, perhaps elsewhere. As the grain moved from the field down the Nile, down into the port of Alexandria, and then across the Mediterranean, the infrastructure that was used was either directly maintained by the state or was contracted by the state or coerced by the state. The state provided a kind of insurance policy for the shippers of grain that took the grain from Alexandria in Egypt all the way over to Rome. State officials in Rome, once the grain arrived there, would supervise and schedule and regulate the grain being unloaded and then carried up the Tiber River into Rome. And then it was distributed in Rome by a kind of state-run process and at state-subsidized prices. And in fact, for hundreds of thousands of people, the grain was given away for free, again, at state expense. We know that Antoninus Pius invested in the harbor at Puteoli, which is where some of those Alexandrian ships arrived. He also, on the other end of the grain supply, over in Egypt, restored that famous lighthouse at Alexandria, the Pharos, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. That lighthouse had been built almost 500 years earlier and was nearly 300 to 350 feet tall. Unfortunately, it suffered often from earthquakes, and it's just hard to build a building that tall in the ancient world and have it stand for hundreds and hundreds of years. So Antoninus' silver coins largely featured those sorts of themes. Interestingly, what is not on the silver coins are military themes, which is a bit strange because we tend to see military themes, themes of victory, themes of soldier loyalty on the coinage of previous emperors, and also this is the case on the coins of later emperors as well. But there's almost no military symbolism on the silver coins of Antoninus Pius, let alone on the gold coins. There were some military themes when southern Scotland was invaded in the early 140s, but that's about it. The overwhelming focus was on the Annona. Because we know so little about the reign of Antoninus Pius, historians tend to view this emperor not on his own merits or demerits, but as a kind of gateway into the reign which would follow him, which we know far more about, and which is seen as the pinnacle of the Pax Romana, and that is the reign of Marcus Aurelius. And so next time we will look at the early life of Marcus Aurelius under Antoninus Pius, and how Marcus Aurelius was groomed to take over the Pax Romana. Of course, little did he or anybody else know that Marcus Aurelius would be the last emperor of the Pax Romana.
Thanks for listening to the Pax Romana podcast. For more information, including a list of primary sources and further reading, check the show notes. Music by Red Productions and Exocore. Follow Professor Colin Elliott on X at ProfCPE or email colin@paxromanapodcast.com. Listen to more episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or just about anywhere podcasts are available. Stay tuned for the next episode of the Pax Romana podcast.